Hello everyone, in this video I will talk about debit and credit as used in accounting. The term debit and credit is used by accountants when recording transactions in accounting using a double entry system and T accounts. In the double entry system, each transaction affects at least two or more accounts, and the debits and credits should always be equal. So what does the term debit and credit mean? From accounting perspective, debit means left side of the T account and credit means right side of the T account. So if we draw a T, this is called a T account. It can be created for any account. So the right side of the T is credit and the left side of the T is called debit. That's it. You should not confuse it with how these terms are used in verbal language. Just remember, debit means left side of the T account and credit means right side of the T account. Some accounts will have increases with the debit entry and some accounts will have increases with the credit entry. Meaning, when account increases with a debit entry, then for that account, we will enter all increases to that account on the debit side. That is the left side of the T account. And when an account increases with credit entry, then for that account, we will enter all increases to that account on the credit side, which is the right side of the T account. Let's see which accounts will increase on debit side and which accounts will increase on credit side. We will look into the balance sheet accounts first. So first we are going to look at the balance sheet accounts. The balance sheet is created based on the format of accounting equation, which is assets equal liabilities plus equity. The assets should always be equal to the total of liability and equity in order for the balance sheet to be balanced. We also know that for the equation to balance, the debit entries should be equal to the credit entries. Keeping that in mind, let's look at the asset account first. Assets. What are assets? Assets are the resources owned by the business which have economic value and can be converted into cash. Asset accounts will increase with debit entry. So asset account will increase on the debit side, on the left side, and they will decrease on the credit side. Let's take an example. Your company received cash by selling a product for $200. Now, in this transaction, two things are happening. You sold a product, means you made a sale, and you received a cash of $200. Now, there are two accounts involved. So we will make two T accounts. One for cash because we received cash and that's an asset, and one for sales, which is a revenue account. Now, as we said that the assets, the increases are entered on the debit side, and we received a cash for $200, so we will enter that $200 on the debit side. Okay. And where will the credit entry go? It will go on the revenue, because the revenues, they increase on the credit side. So our equation will be balanced. We increase the cash, we increase the sales. For cash, the entry will go on the debit side. For sales, the entry will go on the credit side. For now, just concentrate on assets. The assets increase on the debit side, they decrease on the credit side. Because we received a cash of $200, we entered it as an increase on a debit side. Okay. There are some assets that may have contra accounts. The accountants use contra accounts because they don't want to reduce the value of the original asset directly, to keep the financial accounting records very clean. Not all assets account will have a contra asset account. Example for cash again, the increases and the decreases will be done on one account. Whatever the increase, it will go on the debit side. Whenever there is a decrease, it will go on the credit side. Let's take an example of another asset account, like a truck. The truck is an asset for the company. Let's say that your company purchased a truck for $100,000. So what you will do, you will enter the asset on the asset side of your balance sheet. You will create a new account called truck, and because the assets, all the increases in the values go on the debit side, we will put that 100,000 on the debit side of the T account. Okay, and then it will have a credit entry. Maybe the cash will go out by 100,000 if you paid by cash, or liability will increase by 100,000. But for now, if the original value of the truck was 100,000, we made account called truck and we entered it on the debit side. Now truck gets depreciated every year, right? The value of your vehicle is depreciated every year. So instead of decreasing the value of the truck in the original account, the accountants used a contra asset account. That's a contra asset account for truck, and they will reduce the value of the truck. For example, let's say it's depreciated every year by $1,000, so they will enter it in the contra asset account. Because the the increases are entered on the debit side, for the contra asset account, we will decrease the value of the truck by putting a credit entry. So all the depreciations will be recorded on the credit side in the contra asset account. So contra asset is opposite of asset. Just remember it that way. Now let's talk about the other side of our balance sheet, which is liabilities and equity. While discussing the balance sheet accounts, I want you to keep the accounting equation in mind. Assets equal liabilities and equity. Remember, assets increase in debit side. So on which side will liabilities and equity increase to keep the equation in balance? Both liability and equity will increase in value on the credit side, the opposite of asset. And talking about the contra assets, for liability and equity, their increases will be on the debit side. So if the equity increases on the credit side, if the equity is increasing on the credit side, where will the increases happen? On the contra equity account, on the debit side. Now, dividend and withdrawals are contra equity accounts. They are contra equity accounts. So any dividends or any withdrawals will go on the, they will increase the on the debit side. Why? Because they reduce the stockholder equity. The contra equity accounts reduce the stockholder equity. So if the equity is increased on the credit side, the contra equity will be increased on the debit side. Okay, now let's talk about the income statement accounts. What are the income statement accounts? They are revenue, expenses, gains, and losses. These are the income statement accounts. Now ask yourself this question: which balance sheet account is affected by revenues, expenses, gains, and losses? Where do all the information from the income statement flows to in balance sheet? The answer is stockholder equity. Okay. Now, why the information from income statement flows through into the balance sheet account equity? Because income statement accounts are temporary accounts. The income statement accounts are closed to stockholder equity account, which is a balance sheet account. These accounts will begin each year with a zero balance. At the end of each year, the income statement balances are transferred to stockholder equity account. Balance sheet accounts are the permanent accounts. Balance sheet account balances are carried over to the next year. Okay, so income statement accounts are temporary accounts. Now let's talk about the increases and decreases of the income statement accounts. Now, revenues and gains, they increase the equity account, and expenses and losses decrease the equity account. Okay. When the stockholder equity is increased, on what side of the T account is it recorded? On the credit side. It's recorded on the right side. So because the increases in equity are entered on the credit side and revenue and gain increase the stockholder equity, so the increases in revenue and gain will also be entered on the credit side. And because the decreases to stockholder equity are entered on the debit side, and expenses and losses also reduce the stockholder equity, so both expenses and losses will be entered on the debit side. I hope this helps you to understand a little bit of this debit and credit. Now, before ending this video, I want to give you mnemonics for remembering the debit and credit balances. So I'll give you two mnemonics. First one will be for debit increases. Which accounts will have a debit increase? Means which account, for which accounts the increases will be entered on the debit side. The mnemonic for that is deal, where the D stands for dividends, expenses is for E, A stands for assets, and L stands for losses. So dividends, expenses, assets, and losses, they all will have their increases on the debit side. Okay. Let's look at the second mnemonic. The second mnemonic is for the accounts that will have increases on the credit side. So all the accounts that have increases on the credit side are, the mnemonic is girls, where G stands for gains, I stands for income, R stands for revenue, L stands for liability, and S stands for stockholders' equity. Okay, let's review it one more time. For the account balances, for the accounts that have increases on the debit side, the mnemonic is deal. Where D stands for dividends, E stands for expenses, A stands for assets, and L stands for losses. All these accounts will have debit increases: dividend, expenses, assets, and losses. The accounts that have the increases on the credit side are gains, income, revenue, liability, stockholders, equity. Just remember these two mnemonics and you will be okay with these debits and credit. I hope this video will help you understand the concept. Goodbye.